Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of AuctionChatter here on the podcast. As with all the AuctionChatter episodes, I'm going to be joined once again by Moshe Maimon. And this episode we're going to be discussing Legacy Judaica, their forthcoming auction, which will take place on Sunday, September 14th at 1 p.m. As always with Legacy, it's in person in Estrea in Lakewood for those interested in coming and observing in person, which is always a fun thing. You could actually observe. Many auctions take place in person, whether online via BidSpirit or their website or wherever they may be, but less and less these days, especially for those in Lakewood or in the New York area, tri-state area, you want to come and observe an auction in person. It's always fun to watch the bidding, and you can see there's people there in person, there's people online, people on the phone, so it's a very busy situation.
And it often draws a Sfarim-loving crowd. So listeners of the podcast may actually find people they know there.
Yeah, it's good for fun. So I was by the last one. And so that will take place Sunday, September 14th. I will link in the show notes for the catalog. You can check it out. And as always with AuctionChatter, this episode is sponsored by Legacy. So thank you to Legacy. And I think the proprietor of Legacy, Yehuda Schwartz, who is a good friend of both of ours, he reminded me again, as he does every time. I think he was the first one to do AuctionChatter. And so I'm appreciative of that. And we're going to discuss this catalog with 257 lots, a large catalog, as always with Legacy, a beautiful printed catalog, really well done. And there's a lot of very interesting items, things that we've discussed in the past, we'll discuss again, new items, letters, and many other interesting items. Also, I want to mention right in the beginning that for those interested, the items are available. You can actually see the items if you want to see before. There's pre-auction viewing in Lakewood Wednesday, September 10th, Thursday, September 11th, and Friday, September 12th. You can also reach out to Legacy. You can reach out through me if you're interested in seeing something before, you bid on it, or you want to really know more about it, you want to see it in person, it's available, it's accessible, you can let me know. So, with that, let's jump in. And I have the printed catalog in front of me, and so usually we start with episode 1, and as we mentioned, sometimes we highlight some more items, sometimes we run through the catalog more, highlighting along the way, little things. But we're actually not going to start with lot 1, because right when you open the catalog, this glossy, beautiful catalog, the first lot is lot 170. Now, it's because they have it listed here on the page. That's because this is the centerpiece of the auction. It's a handwritten manuscript of the Vilna Gaon. And so they put it here. So I think it's appropriate if we start off with that, because that's a very awesome item. This is an item that we both saw in person. There was an event about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, for Mesifta Ner Moshe that was able to be involved with the Mesifta every year in Lakewood. They have about their dinner. They put out many manuscripts and letters and svarim and things like that. And Rabbi Yehuda and Legacy are involved with that as well. So we were there and we saw this item was there on display, and it's really amazing to see the manuscript of the Vilna Gaon. Now, to be clear, this item, this lot 170, it's very, very small. So it's a basically two-sided page of the Gra, and it's not all the Gra. It's from the Gra's commentary in Sefer Chavakuk, and it's basically Hagois on that in the Ksav Yad of the Vilna Gaon. This has been confirmed by experts of the Gra, but most of the manuscript is not the Gra. There are a few words, I think it's like 14 words in total, that are the Gra. But again, it's still amazing to see the Ksav Yad Kodshay of the Gaon, even if it's just one page, and it's just, on a little bit. Also, I don't know what's interesting, it jumped out at me, is that this item right now, it's a starting price of $35,000. At the time of recording, at least, there was no bid. It's funny when you see other Kisvei Yadis, even I think somewhere recently, the signature of the Basayim for like $125,000, $130,000. Again, I'm not comparing Gedolim. You see pages of the Cham Soif from Quebec go for so much more. So why they're going to starting at $35,000 is interesting. Even if it's just one page and a few letters. Sometimes we see now the market for Gedolim signature and autographs and things. It's just very cool to see the Gra, and it's pretty rare. So Ramesh, if you have anything to say about this item,
yeah, it's you're right. It's right now it's unique that it isn't higher, but I do expect that it will go for a lot higher, because the Vilna Gaon of all, maybe in the last 400 or 500 years, is probably the most singularly famous, Achron with such a huge impact. And again, different collectors are interested in different things, but there's definitely a market for such a sefer, which is probably why we're not getting the whole sefer. We're getting a page here. I expect other pages will show up at subsequent auctions and maybe in other venues. But this sefer is it's also a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, who's writing down the Vilna Gaon's shiurim. The Vilna Gaon explained orally Sefer Chavakuk, and the Talmidim wrote it down. Most of what we have in the Vilna Gaon is from Kisvei Talmidim. It's shiurim that he gave, and they would write it down. Talmidim, like the Chazon Ish famously said, a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon means he spent an hour a year with the Vilna Gaon. They didn't have a lot of access to the Vilna Gaon, but the ones who had access were already very big people, and the Vilna Gaon trusted them to write it down. In this case, it's even more so because the Vilna Gaon went over the writing. So, yeah, the Vilna Gaon didn't write this, but the Vilna Gaon did review this. The Vilna Gaon had in his hand this Pirush on Chavakuk, went through it, made a little emendation here, a little emendation there, which in a sense gives his stempel, his stamp of approval on the entire Sefer. So we're looking at a Sefer held by the Vilna Gaon, reviewed by the Vilna Gaon, and commented on by the Vilna Gaon. So it's obviously a very rare and unique item.
Yeah, and it's well worth seeing for those interested. And I don't know how available it is now just to see it if you're not potentially bidding on it, but it's a very cool item. Definitely look it up online. You can actually see a picture of it, which is quite nice. Now we'll run through some of the items in the catalog as we always do, highlighting some more than others. So there are a lot of really nice classics in this auction, bound well, good quality. That's something that we discuss always, and really you should look at it to do it justice. So right in the beginning, lot 2, there's Ben Shmuel. That's the drushes of the Marshdam. This is Mantua 1622. Drushes, there's something of a renaissance lately. I think some drushes farm have been reprinted. Some people are interested in drushes, but drushes are always interesting to see. Not only Torah, sometimes the style change in drushes, but also sometimes drushes you can see the different gedolim at the time, what they were giving Musar, especially if you see like a Shabbos Shuvah drusha, you can see what they were exhorting their Kehillah and saying, you got to do Musar on this. It's always interesting, like Ned Yehuda's drushes. It's fascinating to look at. So these are the drushes of the Marshdam.
And the Yehuda's drushes maybe are a different genre. And the Yehuda drushes, they have a lot more agadata in them. There is divrei agadach. Some Sefer also, like his drushes are full of brilliant agadic interpretations. The Svardik drusha, like the Marshdam, and maybe others famous, like the Maharit wrote Sefer. A lot of the Svardish Achronim who wrote Sifrei Drush, their drushes are quoted by Rabbi Kiva Eger in the Gilyon HaShas because their drushes are very, very lumdish. It's applying the Svardish Pulumdis to Mamorim of Mamori Agoda, but they're very heavy in learning, which definitely is a factor in what you call the renaissance of the old drusha.
That being said, they're not that easy. If you look at lot 5, Divrei Shalom, which is Venice 1586, this set of drushes for Shmuel Adarbi, who is the Divrei Rivas. Another one that's Tan Reis Taitachak. This is that whole this is not this is that old Svardish drushes. These are not so easy to find. For those that see some have been reprinted, but these are definitely heavy. They're not like sit back, listen to like a Musa Shmooze necessarily. There's much more in a lot of these drushes. So for those familiar, okay. Lot 7, we have a Mekach Memkar, Rav Goin. We have the first edition of Venice 1602. Lot 8, you have Lechem Dimon Echa, which is a finish where this is Rosh Shmuel Diosidia. This is not so well known that he wrote this. This is the Medrash Shmuel is well known on Pirkei Avos. But when it comes to Lechem Dima, for some reason I don't think it's not a well-known sefer. Lot 9 is Lev Aaron. Lev Aaron is the Carbon Aaron. Again, another Mechaber that's very well known for the Carbon Aaron. He lived in the 16th to 17th centuries. He was from Morocco, and he wrote the famous commentary Carbon Aaron on Torah's Kahanim, but he also wrote Lev Aaron on Nach, and it's not as well known. And so that is Lot 9. Lot 10 is the first edition of Mavar Yabayik. We've talked extensively about Brachia of Modena. This is still the classical sefer on Avelos and Chaver Kadisha and other things. Obviously, this was very used by Chaver Kadisha. And again, this is still an important sefer. That's the original first edition of that. A couple of other very important first editions, but something that's very interesting in here, actually pretty fascinating, has a 2-page spread in the catalog, is Lot 14, Mishnayos of Sabioneta, Mantua, 1559, 1562. So first of all, it's like published over time. It's not like in one spot, one place, one time. But what's interesting about this is the first volume. So first of all, they're beautiful bindings. It's a beautiful set. And we were also, at that event, we saw the Seder Zroim. I believe it's the Seder Zroim volume that it has... Unless I'm wrong, one of the volumes here has over 150 glosses, hagois, unidentified. Beautiful glosses throughout the entire sefer, and they're not known. So for someone, not only do you get a really nice set of Mishnayos, those interested in this, an old set, you also get these hagois that just unknown who they're from.
And the writing is pretty well preserved, although I caution you, it's Italian writing. Italian cursive is... one of the harder ones to make out for the uninitiated, but it is clear, and if you get the hang of it, this should be a lot of value there.
Yeah, it's not totally different. I think real Svardish Ksav could be very different for those familiar today, but yeah, Italian definitely, it's not time and play. Whenever we talk about manager, right? You have Ashkenaz, and you have Sephardi, the cursive. You have Italian. You have Middle Eastern, if you will. Like they're different. We're talking about Sephardi. Was they from Spain, or were they from Morocco, or then you get later on when they move to the Middle East? The signatures change. The handwriting completely changes, and so there are real differences between them. So okay, lot 19 is a Ralbag, a Pirush al Torah, Venice, 1547. As I think we've discussed in the past, the Ralbag was extremely important and influential. And so already when you get to 1547, there are a number of editions of Ralbag published. Lot 20 is a Rosh Amana. Venice, 1548 is a signature. They don't know who it is. Rosh Amana is the Abarbanel, his critique of the Sefer Ikrim and defending the Rambam, if you will, is really what it is more than anything. You have lot 21, a Sefer HaChinuch. Again, this is without the Minchas Chinuch, so just the Chinuch. Used to be just the Chinuch. It was a small book. You can go through the Chinuch, but now it's obviously all with the Sefer Minchas Chinuch. Going forward, there's lot 22 is a Sefer Ikrim, another classic of Venice. And you can see some of these, it's always interesting to see some of the old title pages, but they don't have the whole border and a whole elaborate title page back in the day. And then some, you have newer ones. Lot 24 is Naisif Das of the Kli Yakar. This is a little bit of a less well-known sefer of the Kli Yakar. I think Kli Yakar is very well-known. Obviously, he has many svarim. Lot 25 is a really nice copy of the Sefer Shulti Gibarim. Sefer Shulti Gibarim, we've talked about him, I think, a while. Bavram Port Leone. And this is a very interesting and unique sefer. He was a Rav, and he went to medicine and university and had his degree. And this is a sefer about the Kelim Levis HaMikdash, and he's incorporating like all sorts of interesting concepts. He's a real Renaissance man, if you will, living in Renaissance Italy. It's a fascinating thing that was redone in a beautiful new edition of Mechon Yerushalayim. This is a very interesting sefer for those who aren't familiar, and it's got a whole title page, and it's quite an interesting sefer for those that are not familiar. It's well worth checking out. Now, continuing along, lot 28 is a Tashbats. It's the first edition of Tashbats, but for those looking at it, Tashbats, not Duran. The Tashbats, the Tashbats Cotton, as you call it. This is the Talmud of Rami Rothenberg. Rami Rothenberg had a Talmud. I think maybe we talked about this in the past, but it's actually common with the Ashkenaz. I think people think today, I was just talking to someone about this today, but as it pertains to Minhagim's farm, other Minhagim's farm we have that I think people see today. You have like Kevetz Halachos and all these contemporary svarim, like writing down minhagim van hagis of like Rav X. They put out in the recent Rav Forsheimer, Rav Miller, etc. There's not a new thing, because if you look at old svarim like the Tashbitz Cotton, they're writing of like my Rebbe Rami Rothenberg did this, he did that, he did this. If you read these Ashkenaz farm, like at Yoishev, Shumas Desh is a good example. Like they literally are like writing like little things that they did. They literally went here and he went here and here. It's you read them, it's like, oh, this is exactly what's being published today. I don't know what the gap was a few hundred years, but you see such a thing.
The main difference being, Nachi, that is before the Shulchan Aruch, so therefore there was no handbook. And of course, Minhagim, what your Rebbe did was obviously carried a lot more weight than it does now, where Minhagim are basically customs and things which are of less, halachic significance, perhaps.
Lot 29 is the classics, is the Chuvas Ralbach. This is printed in Venice, 1565. Obviously, this contains the whole Kundra's Smicha, the whole Smicha controversy. Rabbi Rav and Rabbi Kara was there, and others. This is quite a important sefer.
One of the greatest rabbinical polemics of all time is definitely the sefer. This copy comes with first of all, unidentified rabbinic glosses, and if my eyes are not deceiving me, they look also like they're Italian glosses. But it also has the page of corrections, and we once spoke about this before, Nachi, how different Ralbachs, which is true of the ancient printing method, which was, some were printed over months' time sometimes, so that you could change little things. If something occurred to you, it wasn't written well, or it was too sharp, or whatever, you could take it out. Or sometimes you would change something to answer a critique from somewhere. So not all the Ralbachs are the same, and so. Later on in the printing process, they even issued a page of corrections to, for things that were corrected in some, but not corrected in others. That came with a page of additions. It's a rear page. This copy does come with that page of corrections.
Yeah, stay tuned for these AuctionChatter miniseries on early Hebrew printing, and this is often what happened, as we discussed there. They only printed a certain amount of pages per day. They'd have to take each one off the print and then correct it and move the movable type, and so it was not an easy thing. So oftentimes you did have changes, and you had a corrector at the press, literally correcting. It wasn't like Moshe, you had day job at Ali Zayis. This is like a different. They were literally correcting each page, and you had mistakes. You have a luach hatoyas in the back because they found errors, as you always find it. That's why some of this farm have luach hatoyas. Okay, lot 33. It's a near complete copy of Torah Sa'ila, the first edition, Prague, 1570, with a rare diagram. It has a full diagram. The Torah Sa'ila is the Ramah's classical work on the Beis HaMikdash, and the Kalim, famously he says that philosophy and Kabbalah is the same thing in a different language. For those who are familiar with this, so this is one of the Ramah's farm, and this has the diagram, although it's missing a few pages, as is noted here in the catalog. This is a real classic work. Lot 35 is Yedei Moshe, which is a classical commentary on Megillas. Not as well known. I think we've mentioned Moshe Almasnino, big darshan from Salonika from time to time. And this was his classical commentary on Chamesh Megillas. Again, I don't think he's so well known today anymore. In some circles he is, for those who know, so to speak. But
he's coming back now with Avat Shalom, printing some beautiful editions of some of his drushes. Again, these drushes maybe are a little less lumdish than the typical Sephardi drush of the next generation, but also very important. They're very philosophical, very, very broad.
Philosophical, very in-depth, very broad. Mametz Koach is this classic. They redid, and they redid another one, Teres Moshe. I think they were called one of Shabbos. They didn't redo Yedei Moshe. Someone else did. It's not around. But those are, they're heavy. They're not light drushes. And I think he was, not Dana Grassi, I think Dana Reina. I think he was employed there in Salonika. He was involved with the Nasi family. He's a very important figure, Ramesh Almasnino, at the time.
One second, I was just recently talking to Talmud Chacham about the famous Rambam and Hilchos Tshuva about Yediyah and Bechira. People are learning Hilchos Tshuva now, and in the course of the conversation, he mentions to me how the Meshech Chachma has a very long discourse on this exact question of Yediyah and Bechira, which is very very far-reaching, and he also quotes a lot of sources, including this Talmud Chacham tells me Ramosha Al-Moshnino. I said it's Al-Mosnino, but it's true that he does from these drushes, these philosophical drushes. He was later quoted by I think it's the Taisus Yontiv, and then from there made its way to the Meshech Chachma. So he has a lot of very important things to say, and this was a very important pirush on the Megillas.
Lot 36 is Yesh Alekim from Rav Ram Salom Megillas Esther. This is the sefer we discussed in the past. Lot 37 is part 2 of Yesod Amunah. This is the Chassid Yavitz on Amunah. It's printed in Lublin, 1596. Interesting, it's printed in Lublin for the Chassid Yavitz. Chassid Yavitz is from Spain. He went to Italy. He dies in 1507. But what's interesting about the Chassid Yavitz, I think, though he's familiar for his commentary on others, but he has others from Orach Chaim, which was reprinted recently, a gorgeous edition with a commentary of the Bnei Suscha. That's his sefer decrying the ills of philosophy, and he says that was the whole area. Famous, I think, his quotation about what happened in Spain by the expulsion, the conversion in 1492.
You might say, Nachia, that's really the Briach HaTichon of all its form. His Pirush on Tehillim and everything. It always boils down to anti-philosophy.
Correct. He really went anti-philosophy, and he has allusions to, not against, but Abarbanel and Aked. I mean, he knew all of that. Yeah, he's one of those, that whole dar. We have many Svarim of the Gedolim that left. Which is actually quite interesting, how many Svarim we have from the Akeda and the Barbanel and the Chassid Yavitz and the Toldos Yisrael and the Tzoram Moravam Saba. There's so many. They wrote like classical texts, and they all left the Gerush. They all left. So that's that one. Lot 38 is Yosef Lekach from Cremona. It's the second edition in 1576. Which is the Maisa Baal Maisa Shem on Megillas Esther, real classical work. Then we move into Incanabula, post-Incanabula part of the catalog. And Incanabula is, again, in the 1st century of print, 15th century, post-Gutenberg and on, until 1500. And then post-Incanabula is like the period right after that. So first we have a post-Incanabula. I'm not sure why they put a post-Incanabula first, but okay. That's the first one, which is a Karakemach, a first edition of Constantinople, again, a near copy. But what's really cool, and we saw this in person also at the event, it's an Incanabula. And it's really fascinating to see this in person. It's a Ramban's commentary on the Torah. This is Lispin, 1489. Now, the thing about this lot, which is important to point out, is that it's an extreme lacking copy because it only has 65 pages. So it's missing a lot of pages. But that being said, with this lot, despite it's missing a lot of pages, it's the Ramban. And not only is it the Ramban, it's the Ramban from Lispin. So also, the starting price on this is $5,000. So can you imagine? It's missing. But it's 65 pages. Ramban's coming to print in Lispin, 1489. This is pre-expulsion from Spain. Obviously, it's Portugal, so in Portugal, 1497. But this sefer went from, I was saying this by the event to people when they were holding it. It goes from Portugal in 1489, and now today somehow it's in Lakewood. You could also see by the picture they put up, it's got scotch tape on the page. And we had this in person, this Ramban, when we were by this event, and I was asking myself, someone scotch taped this. So first of all, who scotch tapes a 500-year-old book? Who does that?
Right.
But what it shows you, I think, is that someone was using it. They were using it as their Ramban. They were learning Ramban on the Parsha and in Kedoshim, and they put Scotch tape because it was ripped, and they wanted to fix it. They wanted to learn from the Sefer. I think that's what it shows me. I mean, obviously, it's possible not, but again, it's a beautiful print, high quality paper. It's really beautiful. But again, it is 65 of 301 pages. So it is lacking.
But you got to understand, for incunabula, a single page of incunabula fetches high prices.
They sell them, of course. And this is bound in a nice new leather binding with 65 pages in fairly good condition. 65 pages starting at $5,000.
That's a lot of incunabula for $5,000.
It is. And again, it's not an incunabula from Italy. It's his Lisbon. This is from the Iberian Peninsula, which they get expelled from. So it's the Ramban. It's quite interesting to look at. And so check it out. I again very much enjoyed holding it and being able to look at it at that event. It's really cool, and someone can buy that. Yeah. Okay, another post incunabula where you have is Lot 41, which is Sefer HaOruch, and so
this Sefer was owned by Rabbi Shmuel Almaznino. Shmuel Almaznino, we're not sure which one he is. There were a couple. One of them wrote a Pirush on Rashi. Yeah. There were so it's not clear which one he was, but this is probably another member of that famous rabbinic family to which Moshe Almaznino belongs.
Okay, moving on. We go into different, as they call them, printed Sfarim. I mean, the other ones also, but we get into some later Sfarim here. There's an Abar Binel Hano 1710. It said this copy was owned by Rav Eli Monk, which is Rav in the Golders Green. This is it's got a beautiful, elaborate binding. So this is it's missing one or two pages. Also, page of Latin introduction of Hano, and this was the Ramban. Abar Binel is 1710. Then moving on, you have Lot 46 is ends up with the oldest Sfarim, which it was printed in Vilna, one of the last Sfarim printed in Vilna. It's the first edition. It's Chever Maimorim. It's the first edition of the Moshe Shmuzin of Yerucham Levovitz. It's printed in 1939, and they say here it's printed on regal paper, and it was the copy of Reb Ruven Levovitz actually owned this copy. This is a nephew of Yerucham, so this is a nice copy. This is for those more modern stuff. We'll get into some modern books over here. Lot 47 is some old Americana. This is a book of Isaac Leeser.
This book is a catechism. Yeah. Catechisms are popular in the religious Christian world. It's for those who don't know, it's a book of beliefs of religious beliefs,
basic tenets of belief in
religion. And they're formatted in question and answer format, so the teacher can ask. If they're taught in Sunday schools or religious schools where the teacher will ask the question and the pupil will answer with their belief system. So this is Isaac Leeser. We definitely have gone into his biography before, but he was a very early, very important Orthodox rabbinic figure in America in the 1850s. And even earlier, this is printed in 1839. And so he printed for Jewish students. Jewish students shouldn't be any less than their other, Gentile counterparts. So he printed for them a catechism, which I actually read through some of this. It's available online, and it's very, very interesting. Very, very. You can teach it today. It's timeless. It's 200 years later, you can teach the exact same thing in schools.
Leeser's books always go for a lot of money. This one has a handwritten inscription, which they think is from Leeser, which is quite interesting to see, which might be from Leeser as well. So that is Lot 47. Lot 48 is a classics. I think all these books, especially Legacy, always has often a Reb Chaim Alevi on the first edition, Brisk, 1936. And then you have Lot 49 is also Reb Chaim, back to back, but this one has a deluxe custom binding. So it's a little different for those interested in Reb Chaim. You definitely could get a hold of Reb Chaim.
Well, famously, the Reb Chaim, when it was first printed, was printed in 3 tiers. There was first class, second class, and third class, different quality papers, because they wanted to make it available even for, cheaper, and even cheaper than that for those who couldn't afford it. They wanted, to be as wide a dispersion as possible. So there was the deluxe edition here for a donor, apparently. And then there's also the standard edition here. That's for the 2 lots.
Lot 52 was Chuppos Chasanim. This is Livorno 1797. It's funny they were Anglo-Judaica because they're Bethel Moldola. Although there's a lot of confusion, a lot of Moldolas. This is the one that I believe later on goes up to be the Rav in England, in London. He has the famous picture with his wig and everything. You can see the picture of him online. You Google Bethel Moldola. And he wrote this earlier when he was involved in the press with Rabbi Yaakov Nunes Voice, who was I believe, the Siach Yitzchak's son. Some listeners may be familiar with the Siach Yitzchak's Sfarim on Megillah and Yuman Chagiga. And so this is the sefer that he wrote. He decided to write down. There's a lot of interesting material in the beginning. Also, there's Haskamis and Shirim. It's real classical, that whole Italian, Sephardic world. They were writing a lot of Melitza and some very beautiful things. And he gives Hakdama, and he talks about what's going on. He writes about why he wrote a sefer on Chasana. Basically, the sefer goes right from the beginning of the Chasana. It goes from Shidduchim, and he goes through the entire thing all the way through. And he talks about, I think he has a kuntras in the back of Mikvah Taira, talks about Mikvahs, everything related to the whole Chasana, every halacha possible. And it's a classic. It's one of the classical svarim on this. And there are those that go to the kever. I think it's Hasidim, they buy the sefer as a skula for Chasana. So this is the first edition, a very nice copy of the Chuppos Chasanim. Lot 53, Moshe, we have to talk about it. I don't know how much we ever talked about. Maybe we did, but Divrei Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Schwartz, 4 volumes, beautiful bindings. This is Yerushalayim. This is Eretz Yisrael, 19th century.
Rabbi Yosef Schwartz is one of the pioneers of. It's even earlier than the new yeshiv. It's part of the old yeshiv. But he's a very major figure. First of all, for just building and renewing the Ashkenazic presence, the European presence in Eretz Yisrael, but also because his Sfarim are very famous. His Sfarim are famous not just in Jewish audiences, but Gentile audiences too are very interested in his Sfarim, particularly one of them, which is included in this Divrei Yosef, and that's the Tevuas Haaretz. Tevuas Haaretz was his sefer of geography. He's the first modern cartographer, if you will, who went around Eretz Yisrael and charted which cities, what is their meaning, and contemporary names, how that relates to the biblical names, and where the borders are. He was very into the reality of everything he studied. He's also famous for his tshuva about Shkia and the Zmanim in Eretz Yisrael is all built on him, pretty much, because he describes how he would do it. He'd climb up on the rooftops, he'd climb up mountains, he'd travel all across the land to try to get the best view and see exactly when sun rises and sunset. So he was a very major halachist and a very major realist. And this Tevuas Haaretz of his, which is the geography of Eretz Yisrael, was printed in very many different languages, including English and German. It got a very wide dispensation. These are the first editions of those Sfarim. A very famous person. There's a lot of history also that people take out of this Sfarim, where he describes the relationship of the Jewish community with the Muslim community. One thing that stands out that I saw is that he writes how Muslims, they pretty much got along in his time, but they can eat their meat, the religious ones, they have to eat halal meat, which is shechted properly, but they would only eat it from, this is crazy, but they would only eat it from this is what he writes, they would only eat it from the Sephardim. They would not eat meat shechted by Ashkenazim because they believed at this time that the Ashkenazim were not descended from Avram Avinu. They thought they were imposters. These are not really, so their shechita wouldn't qualify for the Muslims. That's one of the things he writes. He tragically passed away in an epidemic that plagued these the new yeshiv and the old yeshiv in the early years. Was they had no protection against these epidemics, and that's how Rabbi Yosef Schwartz passed away pretty young. But he left behind very important legacy in his farm and his family. The Rabbi Lezer Don Ralbag is his son-in-law, the head of a very famous rabbinic Yerushalayim family. So a very important set of farm here is the Divrei Yosef.
Moving on, lot 54 is Chayker and Makubal, the Ramchal, the first edition, Shklov, 1785. It's debated between the Chayker and the Makubal. It's defense of Kabbalah. I think we've discussed that there's some question or the authenticity of the Ramchal writing the Sefer, if I remember correctly. But that is lot 54. It's the first edition of that, for those interested in Ramchal Torah. Okay, moving on. Lot 56 is the Itter Bikurim. It's a commentary on the Baal HaTurim. There are commentaries on Baal HaTurim, and this is one of them. And so this is the first edition in Fürth 1752. Lot 57 is some Shamshval Hirsch, German. This is a Jubilee book to mark the centennial of Rav Shamshval Hirsch's birth. This is Frankfurt, 1908. Lot 58 is Knesset Israel Journal. It's 2 issues, number 2 to 12. This is Vilna, 1930, 1933, for those that like some old yeshiva-type history, if you will. Lot 56 is a Korban Hassan, the first edition of Karlsruhe, 1755. There's a lot of these really nice classics, like Lot 60s, Meiser Rakech, the first edition, Amsterdam, 1740. Rabbi Elazar Rakech, he was the Rav and Brody, and then in Amsterdam. A lot of these really have Lot 61, the Crazy Uplacey, Renaissance Irish is the first edition. So there's a lot of really nice classics in here. If anyone's looking to really build up their library with some really nice classics at some nice starting prices, I think this is a good place to start. Although there are some expensive stuff. Then you turn the page, you get to Lot 63, Ma'aseh Tovia. The first edition, this is Venice, 1707, of Tovia Cohn. It's quite a famous work on science and geography and astronomy. It's not an easy sefer, Ma'aseh Tovia. I think that's why it hasn't been reprinted. I was talking to someone about it recently. He's like, no, it's not really very hard for the right person to reprint it, and what's even the target audience. So this is $2,000 at a starting bid. It's a nice binding, and this is obviously a harder sefer, a heavier sefer, if you will, but quite a famous one.
It's also... It also comes out in the generation after Shabbos Tzvi, and because it's more of a broad kind of sefer, there is a historical section in there where he talks about Mashiach. He as doctors in the Western Europe, were the religious doctors were almost like Rabbanim. They were very important members of the Kehillah. So his sefer includes a lot of hashkaf as well, and in the discourse about Mashiach, he does talk about having lived through the period of Shabbos Tzvi and Nasan of Aza.
His father, Moshe Narol, runs away from Takvadat. His father, is the author of Kel Malei Rachamim, which is interesting for those that aren't familiar, which is an interesting quirk of trivia related to Ma'aseh Tovia. Lot 67, Melechas HaKodesh, the first edition, Prague, 1812. If we ever get to, we were supposed to record a mini-series, if you will, Rosa Fleckless, the Chuvmei Ava, especially for the new Chuvmei Ava, which is forthcoming, Bez Hashem. So, teaser to that, and Bez Hashem, we hope to get to. So, Rosa Fleckless, he wrote this book, Melechas HaKodesh. I want to talk about a very unique sefer that, of all the Rosa Fleckless Sfarim, so far, have been redone. All his drushes, the Melechas HaKodesh, Rishon Sheni V'Shlishi, the Ma'aser Rabbi Elazar, phenomenal Haggadah, been redone beautifully. But Machon Netzach Yaakov, Melechas HaKodesh has not been redone, so maybe this one is not as well known.
It's there is a very small and not much work went into it, but there is a reprint. It was retyped and reprinted in a small red sefer, the Melechas HaKodesh. That's the one I have, and that's the one I've learned, and it's really a very fascinating sefer. The function of the sefer sounds maybe rather boring if this is not your sugya, to determine which shemos in the psukim are kodesh and which ones are not kodesh. So a sefer needs to know that, because a sefer needs to have the right kavanah and the right frame of mind when writing the shem Havaya when it's kodesh, but if it's not, then he writes it with the regular kavanah of writing a sefer Torah. So he makes it. The sefer supposedly is marketed as a handbook for seifrim, but when you get into the sefer, you see that just Rabbi Elazar Fleckless is so bubbling with Torah and so bubbling with personality that even this topic becomes very, very interesting when it's treated by him, because he uses that as a springboard to get into the different pirushim in the pasuk. He says whether if this shem is kodesh or not kodesh depends on specific ways of approaching a pasuk. Is it talking about a malach? Is it talking about very important people, like the word Elohim, which besides for being Elohim could also be referring to malachim, could also be referring to dayanim, like Elohim loizakal. That's dayanim. So he addresses these questions, and he brings in diktuk, and he brings in a very, very broad range of array of sources. I think even Ramad may show up in this sefer as well. But it's he makes it very, very interesting, and I've used it when I was working on Rabbi Rambam. I had occasion to use some of his pirushim, and I found it to be fascinating and enlightening. So this is Taka, very important sefer.
Lot 70 is the first edition of the Meshech Chochmah, printed in Riga in 1927. Interestingly, the Meshech Chochmah is from, it's in Dvinsky's from Latvia. So if you look at Riga, it says on it, you see a stamp printed in Letonia, which is Latvia, and it's stamped right there for those like, what is Letonia? It's actually not Lithuania, it's Latvia, and that's why it's stamped like that on the cover. Lot 71 is a beautiful Mishnayos of Amsterdam, and a magnificent, there's a wood and leather binding of that. It's the first edition of Tosas Chadashim. This is Amsterdam 1775. It's always nice to see those original bindings. Lot 73, Nishmas Chaim, the first edition. This is, as we've talked about, we hope to redo it. For those interested in giving money, we would like to redo Rav Menashe ben Israel, the real classic. What's great about this one, by the way, just to plug this actual copy, is that it obviously doesn't include the portrait, and it does not include Latin pages. But other than that, it's complete. And it's starting at $150. So with a complete copy, with the portrait, we'll go with tens of thousands of dollars, perhaps. But even with Latin pages, it's $1,000 or more, probably. This is cheap compared to that, even though you don't have the Latin pages, which is nice. Lot 74, you have there, Oidas Chodesh HaShlishi. We just talked about Oidas Fleckless. There you have classic Oidas Fleckless. Lot 76, interesting Pinkas Zov, Manischewitz Matzes. It's a journal with some facsimiles and some other things in support of Manischewitz. It's got some other interesting material. So for those interested in Manischewitz or Matzes
or American rabbinic history,
any American rabbinic history really, which I think there's always an interest. So that's lot 70. You can see more about it here. There's a Sefer, lot 77, Sefer Yovel Shimon Shkop, Vilna 1936. There's a presentation letter. They put in a picture of Shimon Shkop Shlita. So you can see that. Lot 78 is a beautiful Sefer, as they wrote Ibronot, Sefer Evronot, as it's known more. We talked about this. Elisheva Kalbach has a book about this. This is, and it's got all the beautiful diagrams. You just look up the diagrams to see. These are calendar books, calculations on astronomy. This is Rebbe Elazar Balin. They're very interesting to see these, especially with the actual diagrams, if you will. Lot 80 is a Shita Mekabetzes. It's the first published volume of Metzia in Amsterdam, 1721. What's interesting is if you look at the bottom of the Shar, he says, "B'shmayim Edi, Shmayim is a witness. V'sahadi b'schakim shehu hitfiz rach chamesh meis oitkim. Only printed 500 copies. V'alkein tiyakar no yakar teferes hasefer zebeinechem. It should be very chashuv in your eyes. Now, I don't know if he printed 500 because he didn't have the money, or he printed it to make it like an exclusive. You have copy number 102 of this, and pay more money to me because I printed only a few copies. I'm not sure why. It's interesting that it does say it on the title page. Something that's interesting also with old books is that title pages or introductory materials, haskamis, or in the back where you have like the worker's sign on it or the chasim of the magia. These are things that don't get reprinted, especially with when you see like the Shit Nukabetzes or Meiri or others from. These are unique variants in the sense that these editions had these little nuggets and you don't always see them. There's a Meiri that comes to mind, printed in Amsterdam, and there was a guy that printed it and he was a rabbi and play ran away and his kids were captured and whatever, and he's got that whole story in there. And these old Haskamas and these Rabbanim in Amsterdam. And you don't see that ever again. So buying a copy is the only way. Anyone reprinting it is not going to put that information in there.
Sometimes these farms become such classics that they're printed and reprinted and reprinted and reprinted, and people even forget that it was ever once a sefer that was just came out and nobody had it before, and they needed to be. You needed to have Haskamas. You needed introductions. Later they outlive those introductions and they become famous in their own rights.
Lot 83, another classic, Sidrei Tara, Berlin, 1783, on Hilchas Nida, and Chiddush Halachos on Maseches Nida. Not redone, one of those that Ashkenazi Gedolim that they're not, for whatever reason. I know there's Machon that's working on redoing some of the Ashkenazi Gedolim, but there you have a sefer printed in Berlin. Lot 84, you have a Rodelheim Tehillim, a pocket-sized Tehillim. And so that is Lot 84. Going on, you have Lot 86, Tiferes Tzion, there's as they write, first published novelum of Reb Chaim Kanievsky in Bnei Brak in 1941. So this is it was Chedushim novella of the students of Yeshiva Tiferes Tzion in Bnei Brak, and the first essay was Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He was 13 years old, and they assume this is the first published Torah, so you can see it in here, which is quite interesting to see for those interested in checking that out. Going on, we have Lot 89 is Toldos Yaakov. This is printed in London in 1770. It's interesting. These are homiletics. So this is on Chumash and Midrash. Rabbi Yaakov Eisenstadt is a grandson of the Panamiris. And he talks about things that happened in England. This is early English Jewry. Again, English Jewry is only post-Menashe ben Israel in the late 17th century. So it's like 100 years later. So this is quite interesting.
And the Ashkenazi community is even later than that. I mean, the community that starts in England was a Sephardi community, Spanish-Portuguese community, and later the Ashkenazi community. And this sefer from the grandson of the Panamiris is obviously Ashkenazic. So it's... And
they say it's the first Hebrew sefer published in a Jewish-owned printing press in England. So
there were other Sidurim and Sifrei Kodesh printed in London, but those were printed by Gentile printing presses, who, by the way, a lot of the printing presses there were publishing that Hebrew type as well, because the Christian Hebraists were very, very prominent.
Millenarians, missionaries, welcome to
Yeah.
England. England's a hotbed of missionary activity. Yeah, it's come up other places in the podcast. I'm sure there's much more to talk about England and what was going on in England. Lot 90 that told us history. We saw caro, beautiful wood and leather binding with the clasps, for those familiar with those old original bindings, those old original Svarim. Lot 93 is a Turei Even, Metz in 1781, a really beautiful binding, a beautiful copy of the Turei Even, the first one. Again, there's just, you turn through this catalog, you see so many classics, like Lot 94 again, and Urim V'Tum, Rabbinus and Eibishitz, both Karlsruhe 1775, 1777, the Rabbinus and Eibishitz. You get to Lot 95, it's very cool for the Sharblatt. You have this old Sharblatt, this is V'Zeis Yehuda in Zolzbach, 1776. So Yehuda Ayosh, Sfardi, ends up getting Algeria, his sefer is somehow printed in Zolzbach, which is interesting. And what's interesting about it is you got the Sharblatt, you have Moshe and Aaron, and Moshe's always got the horns. It's got one of those elaborate title pages, which they often took from the non-Jews, and they use for those who are like, what's going on with these title pages? Lot 96 is the Aris Vash in Karlsruhe, 1779 and 1782. And what's nice, which is right on the front, Tachas, Memsheles, Aidoinenu, Hadukis, Hamayuches, Hamahol, Karl, Friedrich. You see, right? It's always interesting to see, again, another thing talking about that does not make it into modern day Svara. They don't have in the Yaris Davash, anything about the Duke. The Emperor, that gets left out.
Yeah. It is interesting. This auction does have many, if not all, of the Rebbeinu and Eibish's farm, which pretty much all made it to the classic list, to the Stefanski classics, which they refer to all the time. I don't know too many other Machabrim that wrote as much and as in such a wide array of topics like Rebbeinu and Eibish's, and all the farm are classics, and most of them, if not all, are right here in this auction.
Lot 97 is a first edition of Yosef Aimes, published in Frankfurt, 1723. And that's Frankfurt am Main, not Frankfurt an der Oder, as we discussed in a previous podcast. This is Yosef Aimes, is Yosef Yuspahan Nerdloingen. This is a classical work of Minog. We talked about Minhagim before. This is a classic work of Minog. Actually, he brings a lot of Kabbalah. It's quite an interesting sefer on day-to-day stuff. And in the back, he has on Talmud Torah and Chinuch Habanim. There's actually a new edition of this. Fascinating sefer. I was interested in seeing something different. Sefer. You can learn a lot of stuff. I went through it a couple of years ago. Really fascinating sefer. We say that a lot about Svarim. There are a lot of fascinating Svarim. That's a very interesting one.
This Bechlal is very interesting for the study of Minhagim and the effect of Kabbalah on as traditional community as the Frankfurt community. Like when you talk about Minhagim, Minhagi Frankfurt are assumed to be unchanged and unadulterated over 1,000 years. But this sefer has to be taken into account, which, like you said, there's a lot of Kabbalistic minhagim that made their way in as well, like you see in the sefer.
Lot 104 and 105 are Amsterdam Haggadahs. So 104 is the 104 is the Malz Bescheren, is a later edition of the Haggadah. The first edition is 695. This is a later edition. Again, I don't know why they put the later edition first. This is with the map, and then Lot 105 is the second edition of that first Haggadah, so not of the other one. And this is this has the full fold-out map. For those who are familiar with these, you can see it. Check out the diagrams. This one is the title page again, with Moses got his horns coming out of his head, and you have Aaron with the breastplate and everything. So you have, again, probably non-Jewish influences here, but 105, these are, again, 105, starts at $2,000. These are beautiful Haggadahs with maps, and they have a depicting the Makis. These are quite famous Haggadahs, and really, if anyone likes that type of either Haggadah or pictures and images. Lot 107 has a Ben Yochai, the first edition. This is Ben Yochai, is the famous picture of the cave of Rashbi on the cover. This is a Rabbi Moshe Kunitz, his defense of the Zohar. He's really writing against Rabbi Yaakov Emden with Pachas Forum. Refer back to this AuctionChatter Zohar series. We're not going to go in depth on that now. Lot 108 is Chizuk Amuna. It's a polemic against Christianity, defending Yiddishkeit. So Yitzchakov, here it says Troki. It's actually Trakai, but it is better than I've seen some Yitzchak of Turkey. Not of Turkey. He's a Karaite, but if Rabbi Karoi defends Yiddishkeit against Christianity, so that everybody learned the sefer, a very important sefer, defense of Judaism.
It is very interesting sefer. I think this is the same. This city, here called Truckee. Later, we're going to see Rabbi Nachum Bartzovitz's father comes from Truckee. It's a city in Lithuania.
A lot of Karaites in Lithuania.
They're very interesting. They're almost unmentioned in typical, from Orthodox Lithuanian history, but they were there. I remember seeing a letter from the Aderes in his correspondence published by Abbat Shalom with Reifman, a very big chacham, big chayker, and they wanted to know more about the Karon. They were very interested. So I think Reifman asks the Aderes, you live near them, where he was at the time in Panovich. You're not so far from Truckee. Tell me about them. Learn about them. They, for the most part, did not mingle, and that's why there's just almost no contact. But here and there was contact, and one of those, the Talmidim of this one, this not Reb, but Yitzchak ben Avram of Truckee. He's a Reb. Well, they I'm not the first person to make that faux pas. A lot of people do that, but there's a Reb Yeshua in Ibn Ezra, but
by the way, it says on the title page, it says, I should read, Asher Chiber Rebbe Yitzchak Bar Avram Zechrono Levracha Asher Kfar Nitzvas Be'altorf Alidei Odin Yon Christopher Wagenseil. This was Wagenseil, but was not Jewish.
Not Jewish,
and
not
no. So that's how Odin, that's who published it the first time, and now they're printing it again. By the way, Va'ata Nitzvas Mechodash Bekrach Cotton, miniature size, Kedei Lezakas as a Rabbim, Umola Oretz Deis Hashem, Kamayim Ligam Mechasim. And by the way, this is something they did all the time. I don't know if we've talked about this. They printed in small miniature format. You carry around in your pocket or your little bag, whatever you're carrying around. They didn't have a phone. They didn't have apps where you could just look up on it's a Chachma or Safari thing. You got to carry it around with you for whatever it is to learn. So usually it's Gemara, Mishnayos. No, Chizik Emunah of the Karaite. You should know how to defend yourself when the Christian chaps you in the street. You should be able to talk about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And this Wagenseil who first printed it, like you said, he wasn't Jewish. He was a Christian, maybe not a missionary, but a very passionate, maybe even fanatical Christian, but he was a Hebraist. And as such, he made a living bringing out editions of anti-Christian Jewish works. That's a very interesting part of his biography. He was the first one to publish this Chizik Emunah. He published it with a Latin defense or critique of the Sefer, but that only served to make the Sefer, side by side. The Chizik Emunah did a much better job, and he won that round. Later, there's going to be in lot 122, you're going to run into another Sefer, probably the same printing press. This is the Sefer Nitzachon. Nitzachon is also an anti-Christian polemic. Oh, and there also it advertises, this one is Chiba Rabbi Lipman, and there's also Nitvas Mikedem in Altadorf by the Adin Johann Christopher Wagenseil. Maybe it's important, I'm just thinking now, Nachi, it might be important to point out, the reason the publisher is pointing out that it was printed previously by Wagenseil, because otherwise they run the risk of running afoul with the government for publishing anti-Christian polemical works. But here, they're mentioning it was first published by a Christian.
At one point, we should do a series even on the Christian Hebraeus, because they're so fascinating that they were busy publishing. People don't realize how interested they were in various works. There's been studies and there's papers and academic books. It's really fascinating. I think they're not so well known. Some of them, people know Reuchlin and maybe Buxdorf and Wagenseil. There's so many of them in all these different countries. Also, what's interesting is that the year this is printed in, Bishnas ki oz epoich el amim, and it says Safa in bold, Shin Pehei, Brura, Likre, Kulam b'Shem Hashem, La'ovdoi, Shchem Echad. So you see really this, they're like alluding to everything. This is a real, the Sefer Nitzachon is printed in the Proops press, the famous Proops family. But this one, it says there, Proops, but this one is not. This one is published, we have to open it up and look what it's printed. But yes, anyways, this is printed in Amsterdam, 1705. The other one is 1709. So right later, a couple of years later, this is what they're busy. Amsterdam is obviously a Protestant country, not Catholic. So when the government was obviously more open, this has to do with the Spanish-Portuguese community, etc. Not for now.
I think there's a connection here, because I see that in 122.
No, it could be, for sure.
It also talks about it being a small print.
I'm sure there was. And this has to do with Amsterdam and the Jewish community and so on. Let's turn to lot 109 for the Besamim Roish of Seoul, Berlin. And maybe even inscribed copy of Seoul, Berlin as well. Besamim Roish. By the author or by the publisher? Is he the author? Is he the publisher? What is he? Forger?
Well, he's definitely the author of the notes on the Sefer, the Kasad Arsena. He definitely wrote the notes, which is 70-80% of the Sefer, by the way. It's important to know. People, this is a this is a cornerstone of any classics library. It's such a storied sefer. There's so much about it. It's so interesting, and it's still an interesting sefer. Even today, reading the sefer is very interesting. But it's particularly in this section. This is the polemics section. So if you're interested in polemics, of course, this is figure one. This is just this is one of the most contentious svarim published in the last couple hundred years. And the reason is because, of course, it was right away, almost immediately after publication, it was accused by Maimon Bennett and others of being a forgery. They said, this can't be the Rush talking. It purports to be 392 tshuvas of the Rush. Besamim is 392 Rosh. That's where the name comes from. They say there's no way this is the Rush. And later Chachamim, or later scholars, are working on showing how, besides for the few famous tshuvas which seem to purport an overt tendency towards haskala and modern norms, such as decriminalizing, so to speak, suicide, for example. It's one of the famous.
That's a famous tshuva.
One. But later scholars and academics are working on now. One that we know well is planning on putting out a study showing how even the more what appear to be benign tshuvas are also pushing a subversive kind of maskilic tendency. So when that comes out, we'll have occasion to revisit that. But this is a very famous sefer. I think I remember reading an article by Dan Rabinowitz writing about how his whole svarim collecting grew out of Besamim Rosh. That was the first one he got. He had to get it, and that's how the whole thing took off.
And there was reprinted, the Besamim Rosh Keys Harrison, with like editions in the back, and then Mizrahi republished it. I think it's still available for those interested. Okay, then Lot 110 is more that goof a little bit later. Ela Devrei Abrist, Altena 1819. This is writing against reform, the first reform, the Hamburg Temple. So you have all these things in here from Eger, the Chassam Sofer, Ramot Chabanet, the Blaza Fleckes, the Bert Shire is not so well known, and others. Rosh Mazan, a kind of Firth of Fjord, is certainly not so well known. So you have a couple others. This is an interesting. Go ahead.
It's an interesting sefer, which you might call this is the birth of orthodoxy. Before there was reform, there was no orthodoxy. There was just Judaism. There was people within the community who were more traditional, less traditional, maybe even heretical, but they were all under the same roof. It's only once reform that takes a stand on different issues, and orthodoxy challenges that and codifies where the line is. That's what becomes orthodoxy. This is the first sefer which probably it can be seen as creating Orthodox Jewry, because this is the counter Reformation. This is the this is the
Reformation. Yeah, to some degree, that's what Orthodoxy is exactly. Lot 112 on Chapet is interesting sefer. Kuntris Cheskas Hashuv. This is on Shchita in Lodge, 1939. It's interesting. There's a polemical sefer. You see these svarim, you come up with like, what was this? Where was this? You find this. Reb Chaim Lerman. It was concerning a position of a shaykhit, and he wanted to transfer it to his son-in-law Zaydim. Wanted to give him the job, business. And the halacha is, can you give it to the son-in-law? Can he just inherit it? Can he inherit a rabbinical position or a yeshiva? The things that come up all the time. So it's quite a fascinating and of some relevance, even though that particular story is not. Then you go to Lot 113. It's Kuntris Havlois Hadam. This is another shechita in Frankfurt, 1889. Also talking about this is something that's always going on in Germany. And you talk about shechita issues go on all the time. So this is a shechita issue. This, by the way, we're in the polemical section. I don't know if we forgot to mention. You can see we're in the polemical section over here. Lot 115 is kind of a famous in polemical sense. Meiser Rav, this is London, 1707. This was a get given by Baron Hart. He was in the Great Synagogue of London, and the husband wanted to travel to the West Indies. There was a whole tumult over here, and then the son-in-law of Glickl of Hamlin got involved. I believe the Chacham Tzvi got involved in this. This is a whole hack happened with this story. So that's the Meiser Rav. This is a sefer that was written on this thing. They talked about eventually they split up, and he went and found his own shul that eventually ended up merging back later on, which is ironic. So that is Lot 115. Going forward, Lot 117, I think this seems to come up all the time also. Making of a Gadol, first edition. The thing that always jumps out to me, I just have to say, the first uncensored edition, 2002, opening bid of $1,000. So either you could have like an old sefer from 1550, or you could buy Making of a Gadol for the same price. I don't know. I'm saying this on the podcast. Sorry, it just doesn't make any sense to me. But I mean, everything is worth whatever. The value is what someone is willing to pay. I understand that. But like, what do you want to own? Do you want to own a Ksav Yad? Do you want to own an old Sefer 40 years ago? Or do you want to own the Making of a Gadol? I'm not saying you shouldn't buy this copy of Making a Gadol from Legacy Judaica. I'm just saying about this whole Making of a Gadol being auctioned off constantly. Like, look at the next couple of volumes here. Look at the next 118, 119, 120. 118, Ora Yasher, the Kliva Get, 1769. 119, the Ar Yisrael regarding the Kliva Get, 1710. 120 is again another copy of the Kliva Get. That's a complete edition. I think the other one is not. So you can buy about this is Kliva Get. Fascinating. I always refer everyone. Go listen to the Raid by Israeli Bornstein did. I was with him. We were in Prague and Altneu Shul. Phenomenal job going through the history, going through the Lamdis and the Halacha and the Yehuda's Tshuva and everyone. So well worth going through that. And for those interested in hearing about the Kliva Get and all the issues that happened. Lot 121, Pulmus HaMusar, on the controversy about the Musar movement. It's the only time it was printed in 1972 by Dov Katz. He's printed, we know his history of the Musar, Tnuas HaMusar, but Pulmus HaMusar, this one is printed this one time. So you can read about that.
It has the same appeal, I guess, that people as Making of a Gadol for much of the same reason, because the Pulmus
$150.
The Pulmus HaMusar is the history of the fight against, which actually is quoted very extensively in Making of a Gadol. It used to be a very common sefer. If you went into this farm store in 1975, you can buy a set of Tnuas Musar with the Pulmus HaMusar.
Now it's, I think Making of a Gadol. I think Making of a Gadol is like, it became this like yeshiva shahak thing, and the fact that it was banned and it was nachirim, and it became this whole thing. So it's like a big deal. I think that's part of it.
Right.
Lot 124 is the Yerushalmi Kutchim, the Forge Kutchim. Part 2, we've talked about Rabbi Friedlander El-Ghazi. So lot 125, I'm going to also just say one comment about its placement in the catalog. It's Shalosh Shuvas Zichron Yosef, right? Of Fjorda, Yosef Steinhardt, classical Tshuva Sefer. This is the brother-in-law of Rabbi Shai Pick. He quotes his wife in here, Rabbi Shai Pick's sister. We've talked about it. What is it doing in this section? Well, it's polemical because the author in his introduction makes comments against Hasidim. I don't think that makes it a polemical sefer. I don't think it belongs in a polemical section of catalogs. But nevertheless, it's a very important Tshuva sefer. It's fascinating that he talks about Hasidim. He quotes his wife in the sefer. That's what the Hasidim make fun of it. He calls Zichron Yosef. They call it Zichron. I'm forgetting his wife's name offhand. They make fun of it. They call it by his wife's name to make fun of him. But again, it's an important sefer. I'm just talking about it like being a polemical sefer. I guess because it has a polemical introduction, it's a polemical sefer. But yeah,
about that introduction, it's not so unlike other polemical writings about Hasidim of that time. I mentioned this not so long ago, but it's worth mentioning again. The Hasidim that they seem to be polemicizing against have no relationship, not ideologically, not biologically. It's a very different movement than what let's call the 1800s, the post Rebbe Hasidus. This is the early in the 1770s. The Hasidus they discuss, and there's also this kind of polemical writings that the Yavitz talks about in his Agoyes on Shas. There's in the introduction also of Merkavas HaMishnah. Maybe Merkavas HaMishnah will now also find its way into the polemical section, and the introduction there also polemicizes, and it's written probably 10 years.
Don't say it, Moshe. It's going to end up in the polemical. Next time it catalogs, there's going to be polemics. Merkavas HaMishnah, because you said it's now polemic.
There you go. But it's the same kind. It's the boogeyman today. It's the post Magid Hasidus really has no shaykhs at all to the Hasidim they were talking about.
Now you're going to get the Hasidim coming after you. I didn't say that. Now they're coming after you.
All right.
But let's jump ahead. Kabbalah and Hasidus. There's a lot of really nice Hasidic stuff in here, by the way. So first of all, there's Kabbalah together. So you see lot 131 is a beautiful copy of Shem Ramunim. Such a gorgeous title page. In base of Ergas, printed in Amsterdam in 1736. And this one, it is missing 2 pages of corrections that are missing in many editions, many copies of this. But for those interested in Shem Ramunim.
With the that same kind of binding, though, one missing the clasps, but you do see where the clasps were. This is probably an original binding as well.
Yeah, so you do have that. You have Shulchan Aruch Harav, first edition, Kapust 1814, part Hilchas Nida Shchita, and there's some Shuvas. So you can get some of that, which is quite interesting. You have again, there's Kabbalah's from mixed in over here, so you go back and forth between some from Rabbi Shalom Buzaglo, the Mikdash Melech. This is actually his Sefer Hadras Melech and Kisei Melech. This 1766 and 69. Then we get into its own section, Slavita and Zhitomer. And what's so interesting here is that this catalog has many copies, not a full set, but many of the Slavita Gemara. Slavita Gemara is beautiful also by the event that we were at. Again, there with the red ink on the title page, really nice, fine quality Slavita Shas. So you have, starting off, they have Masechtas Brachas, which is the first one that has with the Haskamas, the rare Haskamas. Again, the Slavita Shas is Hasidim, and we didn't talk about how, I don't know if we did, the whole controversy, the Machlokes between Ram and Slavita, and Rebbe Akiva Eiger, and they said something against Rebbe Akiva Eiger, and Rebbe Akiva Eiger said something against them, so that's, quite a controversy. So then, 139 is Slavita, Sukkah, Megillah, Tainish Shkolim, lot 140 is Beitza, Moed Katan, Chagiga. That's missing the shower to Masechtas Beitza. And by the way, these prices are starting 1,000, 500. You can get, if those interested in Slavita Gemaras, very good value.
Not only that, you can finish your set. There's a lot of Mishnayos here, different Shulchan Aruchs, a lot of these.
You have 141 is Yevamis, 142 is Ksubis, 143 is Nedarim Nazir Saita, 144 is Kedushin, 145 is Sanhedrin, 146 is Shavuos Avodah Zarah, 147 is Vachim Menachos, 148 is Chulin. It's really have a lot of copies here. And again, besides the brachas, all starting at $500. 149 is Bechiris, Erech and Tmura, Krisis, Me'ilah, Tamid, Midas. So you really can get a lot of them. And then 150 is an Erechin as well. And you have different commentaries, different things in there. It's, again, very interesting where you can see lot 151 is Nida and the Mishnayos. And so... then there's some incomplete volumes, really a lot of different volumes, so those interested in looking for different things. And there's really a lot of, again, they always have that red ink, which is quite cool to see. Lot 153 as the Torah and Even Ezer, Slavita. So there's really, again, a lot of, these are not Hasidic Sfarim per se, but these are classics of, the Hasidic world, if you will. You have a Zohar Bereshis, published in Slavita, 1809. 156 is Achak Li Yisrul, Vayikra, Zhitomer, 1849. Then you have another Chak in 1861. You have a Sukkah. There's a Sukkah and Zhitomer Sukkah again. There's really a lot of these here. You can look through this whole section for those interested in seeing more, and for those, this is something that those are always interested in. Now, right after this, they have Sifrei Agra. So right after Sifrei Chasidus, we have a whole section of Agra. Lot 166 is Ayel Meshulish. You have Haggadah Esha Barama. You have a whole bunch of Svarim. And as we said, we teased earlier, lot 170 is that manuscript which the handwriting of the Gemara wanted to get to rather than an hour in. We got to it right in the beginning so we could talk about the highlight of the catalog of the Ksav Yad of the Gra. And then we get into, there's a nice small section here, Holocaust and Communist Russia, which is quite interesting. That right away you have a Shal Shuvas Masas Binyamin, 1776 of Metz. But the stamp on the title page says the Institute for the... I'm translating it. It's the Institute for the Study of the Jewish Question. This was the Nazis' Institute, and it's stamped with that one. You can see the Nazi kind of logo there. Not the swastika, the other logo. And so you can see that over here, right here, 172. It's very... in a certain way, it's cool to see, and to own such a thing that Nazis stamped it, they were going to eradicate the Jewish people and have this stamp to study the Jews. And no, now you can own a sefer with the stamp of the Nazis to study the death of the Nazis. And you're a Jew alive today in 2025. So that's always a fascinating when you see these. They come up every once in a while.
It's so poignant. It's so historical.
Yeah. Lot 173 is a Miri Yeshiva in Gullus in New York, 1950. It's quite an interesting Yiddish pamphlet talking about the survival of the Miri Yeshiva. For those interested in, again, these are some more modern things that are quite interesting. There's a copy of the post-Holocaust Talmud, if you will. This is Kedushin printed in Munich, 1946. You have a Kinna of the Martyrs of World War I, Vienna, 1919. That's lot 175. And you have some other different ones, Holocaust-related things over here. Takanas regarding the ashes of Nazi victims in Krakow, 1939 is lot 178. You have now lot 180 is the Siddur Hashalim in Moscow, 1968. This is a Siddur. I believe this is the Siddur when we did the event for Mesivta Moshe last year. Yes. They brought this Siddur at the event. Quite a fascinating Siddur. It was published under the USSR, so there were certain things that they had to obviously go along with. So first of all, they censored out different things. Allah Malchamais is taken out of Al Anisim. There are prayers to be said on behalf of the USSR. I don't have the Hebrew text in front of me. The defenders of the world. They're Magen Hashalim Ba'ilam Kulai. The Soviet Union. It's a really very interesting siddur.
Yeah, it's a line straight out of the Pravda. What's the Siddur? There was no Hebrew printing in Russia for 100 years, and during the communist era, there's no printing at all. It is a photo offset of another Siddur, and all the changes and the title page are handwritten. They're facsimiles of a handwritten, a title page, and those corrections were handwritten in. Overwriting something in the Sefer because there was no Hebrew printing. It's interesting about the Soviet Union. They're anti-religious, but they do need a nominal religious presence just to show how they're the safeguard of everything in the world, including religion. So there was one shul which the government kept open in Moscow, and the government employed a chief rabbi, and this siddur is under the rabbi of Moscow, Yehuda Leib Levin. He was even able to travel to America a few times, so he got to know the Americans. But he was the nominal head of the Jewish community for the Russian government, and under his auspices, this siddur was published. And it was very, very poignant to hold this and flip through this sefer.
Lot 186 says Aksava Kabbalah, Biakatsi Mecklenburg. This is the copy of Rabbi Ziel Hildesheimer. It's also the first edition in 1839. You have Lot 188 is the Siddur of Reb Hertz Schatz, and this was published by Julius Klugman, who had a Shaykhis Reb Chaim Kanievsky. You see here the stamp of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. It was Reb Chaim Kanievsky's copy. Lot 190, you have the Machane Chaim of Reb Chaim Sofer. You also have an autographed dedication of the Machane Chaim there in the Sefer. Lot 191 is Reb Chaim Kanievsky Reziel HaMalach. This is his Reziel HaMalach Sefer they put out from him a couple of years ago, and he wrote and he inscribed it as well. It's the B'siyat Shema Yerotzen Shia Sefer says Segula L'Shmir Al Yon V'Atzlach B'Chol Yon Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And an opening bid of $5,000. You have a segula on this one from Chaim. He signed it. So for those looking for that, you have it here. Lot 192 is an Eidiv Yehuda, and the inscription is V'chiyashav lo yakoyin shayich la'admu hagoyin. Actually, no. This lot, I should say, it's V'chishav lo yakoyin. This is V'chishav lo yakoyin, not Eidiv Yehuda. But it says on it V'chishav lo yakoyin shayich le'admu hagoyin Rash Kevahag Rabbi Cheskel Halevi Av Bezdin Ram Kal Kodesh Prague, and it's dated. Yud Tes says Adar Rishon Tovkuf Memvav, but it's not an Eidiv Yehuda's handwriting. So it says that he owned it, but we don't know who wrote that. So.
But he did write it during the Eidiv Yehuda's lifetime, which is significant because it shows, if we're to accept this testimony, we don't have any reason not to. It does show the Eidiv Yehuda's association with Kabbalah, even though the Eidiv Yehuda famously said on himself that he doesn't know Kabbalah, doesn't learn Kabbalah, and he wasn't famously opposed to L'Shem Yichud. But he does here have, according to this writer who wrote this inscription, the Eidiv Yehuda did own and study Sifrei Kabbalah. Like that's what the Sefer is, Sefer Kabbalah.
Lot 194 is B'Shal Ransburg. These are unpublished glosses, Hagoyis, on the Rambam. So it's Haflaas Royam Avodah Taira, Fjordo 1767 edition, also with Hagoyis. Lot 195 is the Beis HaLevi, printed in Warsaw in 1890. There's a handwritten correction of the Beis HaLevi as well, a few handwritten corrections of the Beis HaLevi. Lot 196 is Tshuv Mi'ava, the second volume. It's owned by Reb Nachum Tribich, who was learned in Prague. He was the Rav in Nikolsburg in the later on in the 19th century. Then we get up to the rabbinical letters and manuscripts. So we've already been almost an hour and 10 minutes here before we even get to the letters and the Kisviyadas, which there are a lot. So Ramosha, are there any letters that you want to highlight in this section?
There's a bunch of letters here from Moshe which seem, each one seems a little unique, and that's why they highlight them. In one of them, which is Lot 209, this is a non-halachic letter from Moshe, but this shows Moshe the Manig, Moshe the Gadol Hador, Moshe being doeg about something far away from him entirely. It's the Moroccan Jews making Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael in 1968, right after the Six-Day War. After the Six-Day War, a lot of Jews got very uncomfortable in Arabic lands, and there was a big wave of migration from Morocco to Eretz Yisrael. And at this time, the Satmar community is putting out a koil delay pasuk that it's spiritually very unsafe for the Moroccan immigrants in Eretz Yisrael because of Zionist influence there. So Moshe takes it upon himself. He sends a shliach miyuchid, and this is Moshe writing to Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky, who's in Eretz Yisrael at the time. And Moshe is writing to his old friend Rabbi Cheskel. He said, "I'm sending a shliach there specifically for the purpose of checking out the situation and reporting back to me." So this is it's amazing. These are the guys of Moshe. It's nothing to do with him. These are not Jews that he knew, not Jews that he was ever going to ever going to see, but he's doeg for these Jewish children that they should be able to maintain their religious upbringing even in Eretz Yisrael. In the lot 210 is another letter from Moshe Feinstein, and this letter is unique because I was just having a conversation with another Talmud Chacham about this. Moshe typically does not quote, he writes about his father, and he writes about his brother of Mordechai, and Reb David finds another brother. Also, Reb David's the father, and Mordechai's the brother, but he does write about them with tremendous praise. He considered his father to be the Gadol Hador, but he does not often cite him. He doesn't often refer to him in this tshuva, which I don't know if this ever made it to print. We were talking that, this fellow and I were talking about whether Moshe does or does not quote his father anyway. His father's his Rebbe. That's what he considers his primary Rebbe. Does he quote his Rebbe or not? And then the next day, I'm presented with this tshuva from Moshe where he does quote his father and his brother. Then there's filling out the trilogy of Moshe's Tshuvas is lot 211, where Moshe refers to his own published Igros Moshe. And so that's they find that to be of interest here. So those are the letters from Rav Moshe. Moving along, you have lot 213, which is a letter from Rav Gifter. It's written in 1952, right after he accepts the position to move from, he was in the rabbinate, in the American rabbinate in Waterbury, and this is when he agrees to take a position in the newly established Telshe Yeshiva right outside of Cleveland. That is, in my mind, that's a watershed moment for American Jewry. This is where kind of yeshivas become the new face of orthodoxy, and maybe the death knell of rabbinic American orthodoxy. There were a few young Lithuanian trained American rabbis, like in the rabbinate then. You had Rabbi Victor Miller and you had Rav Gifter and some others, but they find the rabbinate is inhospitable to the old Litvish approach. And their place is taken by new American trained rabbanim from YU and Tervadas and other places, but they're not able to preserve the old Lithuanian flavored American rabbinate. Really is it goes away at this point. In my mind, this is a very important, very watershed moment.
Okay. Now, let's go on to there's plenty of other letters in here, but let's jump along to lot 225. You can pick up some other ones if I skip, but lot 225 I really want to get to. Before we get too long and everyone turns this off, but if someone's listening at this point, they're probably still listening to the whole thing. Lot 225 is Reb Chaim Kanievsky regarding, it's funny, you wrote Rabbi Saul Lieberman. The next lot says Rabbi/Professor Saul Lieberman. But there was a tshuva written from Chaim Kanievsky, and it says, is it one permitted to purchase farm from Beis Medrash Rabbanim of America? And Reb Chaim says, it is unknown to me. Ein yaduali. But then they asked him, Ha'im yesh isser lilmoid besifrei bal ha'tesefta kepshuto. So not on tesefta kepshuto of Saul Lieberman. And Reb Chaim wrote back, Ein isser. It's not usher to learn from them. Now, Reb Chaim was related to Saul Lieberman. And there's also a famous letter of Saul Lieberman collecting, saying he knows of send money to this great Torah scholar that's not so well known, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, sitting in Bnei Brak, sending money. I remember seeing this. So
yeah, he also
was
not only that, he recommends Reb Chaim Kanievsky for the Israeli prize for awarded for works of scholarship. He says that there's nobody more deserving than his relative Reb Chaim Kanievsky for his work on the Rambam. That's what Reb Shaul recommended to the Iriyah.
Reb Shaul, Professor Shaul. So this one says Reb Shaul, the next one says Professor Shaul. And then there's so that's quite an interesting letter over here. And then lot 226 they actually have right after a Torah novella from Shaul Lieberman. So you can get, if Chaim says you're allowed to learn it, then you can buy the next lot.
11 pages of Torah. Not Tosefta Kapshut is an academic work. Now, you see his great brilliance, you see his mastery of rabbinic literature for Shteitzach, but you don't have a lot of Chidushei Torah from Rabbi Professor Saul Lieberman. I find that very fascinating, and I'd love to be able to read these Chidushim.
We can bounce around. Lot 224, I'm going backwards, is a report card, a Tu'udah, from Yeshiva Tferes and the progress of Rav Nissim Karelis, who was 11 years old, and it's signed by the Stipler, who gave the test, and Ram Gershanowitz, and the Chazon Ish was there also. It's always interesting to see such things, and not really, signature is not like a manuscript. There's a letter of Baron Kotler, Lakewood, 1954. There's actually a very interesting letter from Rabbi Yosef Hinkin in lot 219. He says, I'm not worthy of paskening and a guna shayla. So, again, jumping over, there's a lot of really nice letters in here.
One fascinating item is Lot 230. That has it's Aryeh Levine. It's a letter from the British mandates in Palestine. It's a letter authorizing him to go visit the prisons. We know Aryeh Levine is famous for his care for every Jew, and in his mind, there's no distinction between frum Jews, Freie Jews, Zionist Jews, non-Zionist Jews. They're all the same to him. They're Jewish brothers, and he made a living going to the prisons and visiting the downtrodden, going to hospitals, visiting the downtrodden. So here is he needed an ishur. He needed a permit to be allowed into the prison, so he applied for one, and this letter is written to him from the government of Palestine, and he's granted in English. I'll read it to you. It says, "Dear Your Eminence, I have the honor to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated 21/2/45, that's February 1945, and to enclose herewith the permit asked for, which please produce on visiting the prison. So that's written by the consul or some other important person, and then on the other side you have the actual permit. So this is what Aryeh Levine needed to be able to be Aryeh Levine.
Wow. Definitely an interesting one. Lot 232, you have a letter of Aryeh Tzvi Partzovitz, the father of Menachem Partzovitz.
From the aforementioned.
This is what you were talking about. Yeah, that's why it's worth mentioning. Lot 233 of Yaakov Zagrudim in Baltimore, 1973. Lot 234, you have a polemic, again, we're back to polemics. Polemical letter of the Rogachev, but it's a letter of the Rogachev of Rabbi Yosef Rosen. This is a polemic. It's regarding a dispute in a rabbinate. So this is, you can see this letter from the Rogachev.
This is written shortly before he died. I don't know of another letter like this where there's no ayin anywhere. He's writing this, I can't get involved. I've heard from both sides of this dispute that I'm not getting involved. There's no Torah content. And that makes it very, very unique for the Rogachev.
Lot 235 is a nice thing. It's a postcard. So on one side you have the picture of Harav Hagoyin Atzadek Ravram Aaron Katzal Av Bez Nekal Kodesh Nitra, and then you have at the bottom Ubrabiner A Katz, and on the other side it's handwritten and signed by Sarah Schneer, detailing a student's progress. Sarah Schneer, founder of Beis Yaakov. So for those interested in something a little different, it's quite a nice handwritten manuscript of Sarah Schneer. Lot 236 is a fundraising letter handwritten by Rabbi Zev Segel. Actually, not handwritten. This is signed, but not handwritten. So Lot 237 is the Babitcher Rebbe, also typewritten but signed. That's Lot 237. Lot 238 is a letter from Lazer Silver regarding Shechita. Lot 240 is Reb Shimon Sofer, the Michtav Sofer in Krakow, 1861, and this is written in German. So you can see he was in the Chassam Sofer. He was in Krakow, the son of the Chassam Sofer. I think he's also this is his son. I think he also served in politics as well in the parliament there. I think. Lot 241 is Moshe Sokolovsky, the Imrei Moshe. This is Bris 1929. You have a letter of the Brisker Rav. Lot 242 is the distinct handwriting. We were talking about that recently of the Brisker Rav. He has that.
This
really
letter was on display as well. I think we saw this
about that event. Lot 243 is Moshe Soloveitchik, written in New York. Regarding, he's writing it to the, as I say, Menachem ben Tzion Halbersham regarding accepting his son to Ritz. So,
and he writes there, it's not up to me. You got to speak to Dr. Revel, but I will put in a good word for him. That's what he writes. Letters from Rav Moshe are very rare, especially friendly, warm letters. I might say.
Okay. Then again, there's Lot 247 is Labram Shmuel Vosner. Lot 248 is Abachanan Wasserman of Shlomo Hyman. Again, he mentions Ritz here, another mention of Ritz in that lot. Lot 249 is Abram Yitzchak Weinberger. It's a Hesperon and Rekiv Eger, handwritten. Lot 250 is Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, the chief rabbi of New York, regarding Kyle Warsaw. So this has to do with fundraising. There's something always going on, so you can check out this lot here. Then there's a couple of other ones. Lot 253 is a picture of the Chavetz Chaim Shlita. It's written. This is a picture during his lifetime.
We know that because it's stamped.
About this.
Right?
Yeah,
stamped.
You see the stamp.
Chavetz Chaim Shlita, and it's that very famous, the iconic picture of the Chavetz Chaim. Yeah. With the name Chavetz Chaim written in on the photograph, which there's this discussion about whether it is a legitimate picture. It's not a legitimate picture. People quote his youngest daughter, Rebbetzin Fega Zaks, as saying that does not look like my father. But first of all, she was born years after this picture was taken. Second of all, ancient photography ancient, but photography in Europe, in Eastern Europe at that time, was not great. But the fact that it was being circulated by people who knew the Chafetz Chaim as the Chafetz Chaim, and there was no voice of protest, it makes it rather, I think, ironclad that this is indeed the Chafetz Chaim.
Lot 253 is a notebook written by a pious and learned woman, as a poll in 1921, in old Yiddish, quoting Chazal, Sefer Hasidim, Halacha, Minhagim, Jewish customs, folklore. I mean, that's a lot of these type of works are. It's a manuscript. And then Lot 253 is 7 telegrams, a selection of telegrams, and then there's a big selection of letters. Lot 257 is kind of like a hodgepodge of just throwing all different letters. There's bank receipts and all different things are just tossed in there.
But a lot of them are people that you may not get otherwise.
Yeah,
you know, it's
absolutely.
People are looking for signatures, they're looking for letters, and sometimes these less famous ones have more interesting content, in some cases. But there's a lot of names there that you wouldn't find otherwise. What jumps out at me is Rabbi Dr. Samuel Soloveitchik. He was Rav Yoshe Ber's brother. Rav Yoshe Ber, in his famous year of Triple Avelut, where he lost his wife and his mother and his brother in that year, and this was his brother.
There's a whole bunch of things. Notes Hoffman in German. You have Yaakov Yitzchak Reines talk about Zionism, really.
Yeah,
Zionim. Rabbi Dr. Louis Ginsburg, an autograph letter of Louis Ginsburg, and there's also this is a really Yaakov Rosenheim, founder of Aguda. You have Mayor Berlin. It's a really whole
Shmuel Mulliver. He's not, Yaakov Yitzchak Reines. These are people associated with the Mizrahi, but they're very famous, important personages, and they're you don't often get an opportunity to have their handwritings, or David Hoffman also.
Some other just unknown stuff and booklets. This is really like a hodgepodge. Just toss everything together for those interested in just
but there may be value
grab
there.
bag. Yeah, you can really just guess and just press bid and check something out and like, oh, that's interesting. So we didn't get to everything, and we ran long on this one because there's so many items, so many interesting items. Once again, as I said in the beginning, and I always say this on all the podcasts, you should go online, legacyjudaica.bitsper.com. There'll be a link in the show notes. Check out the catalog, look through it, whether you're bidding or perhaps interested in bidding, or just interested in looking at it. And again, there are private auction viewings in Lakewood, September 10th, 11th, and 12th. For those interested, you can reach out to Legacy Judaica. It's Yehuda@legacyjudaica.net. You can email him. You can reach out to me. I can put you in touch with him. And also the auction, again, is Sunday, September 14th at 1 p.m., live in Lakewood at Estrea. For those interested, it's live online. You could follow along at the auction. You come check it out. Remember the last auction I went, the Sfarim were there on a cart. You get to check out the Sfarim while you're there, which was a lot of fun. You get to schmooze, and there was some food, and it's just a very interesting experience. Something that, for those of us here in Lakewood, for those listening, or those in New York, or for those in this area, many auctions are still in Eretz Yisrael, and it's hard to check out. So that's nice that it's here. And thank you again to Legacy for sponsoring this episode, and thank you very much for joining me for another episode of Auction Chatter.
Thank you very much, Nachi. Always a pleasure. The auction should be a pleasure as well. And if you do come down there, all your listeners, do come say hi to myself or Nachi. I hope to be there for at least part of it. It'll be a pleasure to see you. All the best, everybody.
Thank you. Be well.